¿Qué tal? Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. I'm going to ask our audience, both here and joining us online, to stand up.
Ahí va. Todas las personas.
Everyone.
Y ahora, siéntense cuando
Now,
tengan en la cabeza un dato sobre las brechas,
I'm going to ask you to take a seat
particular las brechas de género.
as you hear these numbers
Ese
on
dato,
on
si ya lo tienen en sus
gender-based gaps.
cabezas,
Think about
acérquense.
this information or this number, and imagine a number, and then have a
Del
seat.
otro lado de la pantalla, anoten ese número.
Write down that
Y de
number.
esto se trata lo que vamos a hablar hoy.
That's what we're going to
Queremos
talk about
mirarnos en la
today.
región, particularmente sobre la diversidad y la equidad.
We have data on
Y el desafío que
diversity
tenemos es
and
cómo
equity,
concentramos y
and the
cómo
challenge
generamos
is
soluciones
how
sostenibles.
do we generate sustainable
Y para eso
solutions?
me honra estar rodeada
And
de
I'm
personas que
therefore
son
honored
disruptoras,
to be
personas
surrounded
que
by
somos changemakers
disruptors,
o agentes de cambio, que
change
transforman con
makers,
sus experiencias las realidades
people whose
en esta agenda
experiences
tan importante.
have transformed
Para
this
hacer
very
estas
important agenda.
agendas necesitamos tener un propósito
But
claro.
for our agenda,
Cualquier persona
we
se
need a very
dedica
clear
a
purpose.
estos temas en este momento del mundo. Por lo que mi primera pregunta a este gran panel,
It's not just anyone that gets involved in this cause. So my question, and I'll start with Clemencia for this panel, is when was that the moment in your life when you realized that you wanted to make a change, that something had to be different? Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon. A special greeting to the Inter-American Development Bank and its country office in Colombia, the Andean countries department, and my colleagues here in the panel. And thank you for providing us with this opportunity to discuss with our colleagues from the region to talk about the rights of women. I realized that something wasn't right because of what I saw in my native region. Something that we've perhaps all seen. It's a place where we have water everywhere. We have rivers, we have the ocean, but our people have no running water. Health, education, justice, all of that is limited in access for everyone, especially women. So I started to do social work. I joined an organization, a grassroots organization in the North Cauca, and it was a campaign to fight for the rights of farm workers in that part of the region. We worked hard to create the economic conditions necessary for life in our region. And then working with several women from the region, we organized the first Afro-descendant women's gathering in the northern Cauca Valley, and then created an organization for Afro-descendant women. And it was that's been a big part of my life now. And that's the organization where I've done my social work, fighting for equality and equity. And now that we have a new administration that's working to make a change, led by Gustavo Petro, our president, our vice president, Francia Marquez, I'm working toward inclusion, advocating for women's rights as part of the President's Office for Women's Equity. Very inspiring,
de ese propósito
and
a lo
and
largo de la vida y que ya
you
está impactando también en el presente.
highlighted the fact that
Ahí
this is a
aprovecho
purpose that you felt throughout your life that is with
gracias
you
también por
today.
honrarnos con
Maria
tu
Ines,
presencia.
thank you
Siendo
for honoring us
¿cuándo
with your
fue ese
presence.
día y ese momento? Si
When
pueden pensar en un momento o
did that
varios,
moment
como
come
comentó
For you, or a single moment, or many, as Clemencia was telling us, when did you realize you needed to make a change? Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, welcome to Panama. Uh, Looking back, even though I've spent a lot of time in social work and volunteering in a variety of NGOs, I really got into fighting for gender equality when I joined Servitales in Panama, an NGO, and really it was the issue of teen pregnancy that really led me to a greater understanding. And this is important. Just because you're a woman, it doesn't mean you're going to be fighting for gender equality. Another thing I've realized is that sometimes we as women have our own perspective, our own point of view based on our own experiences. Perhaps I hadn't experienced gender discrimination, or perhaps I didn't even feel that there was inequality out there, which we know because of the numbers it's there. But we know that when you're confronted with this, when I look at teen pregnancy specifically, where our society, and some very smart people, they blame that teen girl for what's happened to her, and that teen girl would then have many doors closed, and no opportunities, and that's when I decided to commit to gender, civil society, economic empowerment, as well as the rights of teen mothers. It's very interesting also to see how these stories have really come to life through your efforts in the public sector. Gerardo, what about your story when we think about other sectors like the private sector? What was that moment for you that made you start thinking differently and working toward change? And how does that fit in with what you're doing today, obviously? Thank you so much for hosting us. I'm very grateful to be able to contribute to this process as part of Edwards Life Sciences. I've been part of manufacturing and part of the corporate world throughout my professional career. And I've always been aware of unemployment numbers in the countries where I've worked, and this is something that you know as well as I do. Unemployment rates for women are always higher than what we see for men. And what really led me to try to understand what was going on was doing a compare and contrast with something that's very painful, which is the main reason that women have to leave their jobs is in order to take care of children. So at that point, I realized that something was wrong. We realized then, based on our experience, that even though our country does have a child care system in order to address that need, by design, it's made so that women with good, decent jobs, those women do not have access to that child care system, because that is for women living under another type of other types of conditions. So when you have this labor market, if you have a future in that labor market, at some point you have to make a decision. Either I continue to work or I take care of my children. Because if they opt for private child care, that's about 50% of their income, which leads to them deciding to stay home with their children and leaving their jobs. So that's when my team and I said, we have to do something about this. And fortunately, one of our colleagues presented an initiative called Gana Tres, which is collaboration with the public sector, with Child Care Network. There's support provided for these women. It's a subsidy provided so that these women can pay for part of the cost. Our organization is running a pilot program. We provide a certain amount of funding so that women can have their children in child care. And then the foundation is charged with the know-how how to manage that network and they do the research. And that is a critical part. That's what we said. We have to do something, and that's what we decided to do.
Hay un común denominador.
Well, it seems that there is a common denominator here, and that is how you move from data to action. That's what we hear in what is being said, and also how important it is to understand what is happening in the different lives of the people that you have all discussed. And Gerardo, also working as part of a team, that cooperation is key.
Para pensar
In your story, and to think about different dimensions of what we are discussing here, Rebecca, first of all, how are you? And what moment
cómo hoy dialogan
made you take that leap? And how does that come into play with what you do now in your day to day? Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be with you all today.
mediador este clic.
So I think that for me, it all clicked when I was in the field. I started as social coordinator for renewable projects in Brazil, in my company, and I only saw about 2 or 3 women, and one or two of them were doing the cleaning, and the other was in the kitchen. And I was wondering, why aren't there other women in other roles? Why aren't there women engineers or electricians or other?
Cuando le preguntaba a otras personas
I would ask different people, other men, why this was, and they said, well, women just don't want to be here. This work is too hard for them. It's too hot for them. The temperature isn't right. The long hours aren't right. And I'm thinking, well, I'm here.
yo vi que no era una cuestión
I'm bearing this burden. And so it wasn't so much to me about women not wanting to work. It was about not having that opportunity. And that's when it all clicked. And so I thought, if women don't have the opportunity but do want to work, then we need to bring these opportunities to these women, to give them more job options, and to not force them to only take care of their children or to be with their families or being the caretaker at home. We need to start thinking about how women can also have a better life than having these endless shifts of work that they have to do, and bring them these opportunities. Sure, and also a systems change is the other
eso que a veces estudiamos
common denominator. We know that there are layers and layers here. When we look at research that looks into bias, it's also about understanding what's behind it and how these things can be changed. With that,
cuál fue ese momento
I have this question, for you, Maite. What was that moment for you when you knew that you wanted to change the rules in an environment that was dominated by men, and taking all the challenges you take on today? Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I am glad to be here. Thank you to the IDB for having me. On behalf of the Inter-American Development Bank, it's a pleasure to be here with my colleagues. And as Raquel mentioned, the question really comes down to the moment when you find yourselves to be someone who is diverse, so you identify as a woman, as being black. When it comes to sharing my own perspective, I was hoping to find a way to innovate, to bring my profile to the criteria, to have black women and black men being able to hold a certain position. That was one of the things I was thinking about. I wanted to make an investment to create more business opportunities. And as Clemencia said, black women were simply not reaching certain places, and I was trying to understand why that was. In part, it is because the professional networks are very limited. If you study in a given university, you have access to a very specific group of people, and that is what can help to increase networking opportunities and knowing the right people. This is where we started to look at how you can create opportunities for investing in businesses, and training is very important in that. 56% of the population in my country is black or of mixed race, and yet we're not in leadership positions. So that was an issue that increasingly was interesting to me. Sure, great, thank you very much. We know that given current research, there's a lot of talk about intersectionality. So the same way that in the past we would talk about data, now we talk about concepts. And from everything that you have just said and what was being contributed, we started to understand what that word meant, because when we talk about our region, we talk about a region where everyone, particularly this is the case for women, diversity is multifaceted, not only when you look at it from indigenous communities' perspective, but also for people with a disability or who belong to a different group. That is an issue that we should put on an agenda to address all of the different points that you raised. So let's come back to the major challenge. And I would like to know what you are doing that is different. Clemen, what is different in how you think now versus when you started all this? What would you be tapping yourself on the back for because of something you're doing well? What is what you can think about that would lead you to thank your earlier you for what you have done, especially on such a lonely road? Sure, I think that the challenges are still pretty formidable. We haven't lost hope. We actually came together with other women to keep on fighting. And what I think the government is doing today, this is an administration that wants Colombia to be a global power, particularly in its continuous search for rights and human rights and ethnic rights, and particularly for the women's struggle. We are taking on a number of things from our institution, making sure that women are financially empowered. We need the right conditions and the right assurances for productive work in order to also allow for the kind of independence that can allow women to fully exercise their rights in all of their diversity. We're also creating conditions for women to be part of the peace-building process, making sure that there is also a safety component. We are looking to see more women in politics, but we're also developing different ideas for preventing gender-based violence. This is a scourge that unfortunately affects us in the deepest way possible, not only in Colombia, but throughout the entire region. So to me, what we're doing is all part of the same thing. What we're doing now is the continuation of work that was started by other women and with other women in different parts of the country, women with different profiles and backgrounds. But ultimately, when you look at who is building this social fabric, it's women. Women building peace and creating the right environment for there to be dignity and inclusion, and especially for there to be social justice in our country. Thank you very much. That's very inspiring. María Inés, you shared the story of a network that was important to you. How do you see that working its way into the agenda for the stuff you do now on the public side, and that consistency that Clemencia was just talking to us about? Well, I think like all other countries in the region and in the world, we're facing many challenges. Panama is not spared from these. I think an important part and a fundamental part of our everyday work has to do with the strategy to combat inequality. This is why there's a Colmena plan that is our national agenda is really important, because we're taking all these things. We're also focusing on closing the gap, closing the gender gap. There is the Gender Equity Initiative, We have that in Panama and in other countries in the region. We see the same thing. And this gender parity initiative started in 2018 with the support of the IDB. And during the current administration, we have been able to take it a step further. We have 75 different players. We're talking about government, the private sector, NGOs, all working in tandem on strategies and action plans, and have really made a difference in the lives of over 15,000 women, closing financial gaps, as well as through the strategy to help bring young and disadvantaged women into the workforce, and STEAM strategies, also women's entrepreneurship strategies. And the goal of all of this is to tap into strategic partnerships across all industries, because when we talk about inequality, and particularly gender inequality, that is not a fight that only the government can wage. It's something that we should all be part of, because we're talking about human rights at the end of the day. Therefore, this is something that falls on all of our shoulders and should be across industries. Great, thank you. When we talk about action, Gerardo, when in the private sector you have these agendas come in, and then you think about other kinds of impact on investment, ROI, how can all of this be actionable, and how does this relate to what made you take that first step, and what can you say on that? Thank you. I think that when you look at all of the challenges we're facing as a society, that playbook is already there. You see public-private partnerships and also individual engagement. I think we should all be active players in all of this. And I really liked what you said a second ago. Let's go from numbers to action. As I said, we're lucky enough to have a female employee, Vanessa Barrantes. We're very proud of what she has done. She is a mother, an exemplary professional. She shared her story, and I think that you said it just right. At the end of the day, it all comes down to investment. Yes, we're using government infrastructure, but the funds still need to come from employees and from businesses. And so with this pilot, we have tried to understand how we're making a difference. Just to give you an idea, our organization at this time has probably 2,200 employees, 60% of which are women. Of that 60%, we have about 450 women who, in addition to that, are mothers. Along with the leadership, we have set the aspirational goal of not having any woman having to leave the organization because they have to take care of their children. How do we do that? Well, we have to keep working with government agencies, but also internally we need to look at ROI. So far, we have been able to get close to 7 or 8 women who had a foot out the door and bring them back in. Thanks to that program, we got them to stick around. And we did it as a leadership team, and we would have been happy with just one. But we have also seen different improvements when it comes to women who were late or who weren't showing up for work. And what's important is, as we have all been saying here, that these women are saying that thanks to this, I feel fine, I feel good, because a lot of the research is telling us that many women sometimes have to leave their children with other people, with the elderly, these older folks who aren't really in a condition to take care of children, and sometimes there are problems having to do with addiction and other risks for the child. So when you listen to all of this, and when you actually realize that there is an actual return for the business, that's inspiring. And we love to see how this pilot can continue to be self-justifying and can continue to evolve. When you have a mom who turns around and says, thank you for this program, because thanks to this program, I'm still here, but I also feel comfortable and I see an opportunity to grow in my career, I think that what that tells us is that we need to keep doing the work and we need to scale it up. Great, an impact indicator that can actually translate into the story of one person, which can become the story of many people. That's great. Raquel, I would love to come back to you and think about how important it is to bring the government and the private sector together and looking at the link with investments and what this means for everyday work. You have two dimensions to what you do. One has to do with Atlas and the kind of financing and investment that you were able to receive through IDB Invest, but also that I want to call it double click. We talked about this before getting on the stage, having to do with the communities you worked with. And I don't want to spill the beans here, but how did that help you really go after the goal that you mentioned in the beginning? Well, maybe I can provide a little bit more background here. We're a renewables business, and therefore, obviously, we focus on sustainability. But sustainability isn't only about ESG. It's about all processes, and one of the key processes, it comes down to human capital, the talent. We work on a lot of different dimensions, and a lot of this starts with home. What kinds of benefits do we provide, not only for mothers, but also for men, having paternity leave, maternity leave, so that our staff can feel reassured when they make that choice. It's important for people to choose to be there, to choose to come to work, and to build a better future from within this environment that is just right and it's a safe environment for all employees. That is what allows for the creation of solutions that can go outward. Our biggest impact comes from our projects, what's happening in the field. That's where we can get more people, having 2,000, 3,000 staff members working in solar plants and wind farms. And that is where we saw a need to really move the needle even more with this segment of the population. Prosperity should never be the prosperity for one, but for all. We are also part of the same energy, la misma energía. This is an employability project, but also one that focuses on STEM to bring more women from the region to work with us. We founded the company in 2017. Our target we had 2% of women who were working on our first projects, but now, thanks to this program and with incentives from PPPs, we actually reached 15%. That's a huge number when it comes to socioeconomic impact, because a lot of research has been done and shows that when you actually bring money into the hands of women, that money goes to healthcare, to the community. So that's really important because the social impact can really run deep and can also last a long time. We had two projects that we carried out alongside IDB Invest with blended finance, also with a gender target. The blended finance was useful for our initiative because we were going to reduce the financing rate, but the counter to that was that we could work more with specific targets and goals to better bring people together. And as I was mentioning, in Brazil, race is an important dimension, and we have a very large community of color. And we had this initiative with the IDB, and thanks to that, we had a larger impact, and we got there faster on this intersectionality agenda. Practically 80% of our employees in construction sites are people who identify as Black. And this is a number that makes us really, really proud, because we can work with a lot of people, many of them disadvantaged, in a single program. And these are individuals who many times are outside of the city and those who need the most help. So as Atlas, what we do is really try to advance this agenda, looking at all of the different dimensions, because diversity touches on a lot of different areas. Understanding how deep the problems go, and the fact that we're talking not only about gender, but also Black women who are at risk, who are mothers. What are the necessary packages for women to say, that is where I want to work? We have a benefit that has to do with a daycare service where women can leave their children because otherwise they cannot work with us. They can't do the training that goes with being employed. And so this is the message I want to leave you with and take advantage of this high level gathering.
Muchas ideas pueden ser creadas,
A lot of ideas can actually be implemented, can be
profundizar el asunto
thought of, but the need to actually scale it up to go deeper is urgent.
pero los afrodescendientes
We're talking not only about women, but also black people, indigenous communities, teens.
necesitan de
They
particularidades
all need specific things. They're different segments of the population with different needs, and the benefits package needs to go further because otherwise they're not going to be at the same level as other disadvantaged groups who have more privileges. So that is something that needs to actually make it to the boardroom. It needs to be discussed in management, in leadership, in governments, in businesses.
para que todas las personas tengan
We need to have people who think about what can be done to really level the playing field and give a fair shot to everyone. That's a message we want to leave you all with. Very, very strong message and necessary message. Raquel, just something that you said, and it has to do with the need to look at the context, to understand where people are coming from, and find that talent and that potential. Maite,
campo semántico que cuando alguien
when you have someone talk about startups and businesses, they think about the US, white men, and these kinds of specific semantic components. What can be seen as different here? What makes a difference going on with what Raquel was saying? What can really add value? What's something that this audience should really know about? Thank you very much. I think Raquel is exactly right. In our context, what we need is to mobilize within structures to actually get away from the surface and go more towards what's in depth. There are joint ventures. There is an investment fund that focus on black populations and black women in Latin America. We need to find an investment fund that is focusing on technology and working with black men and women at the forefront. That's a challenge, and that's something that we are taking on. This is something that can really help make a difference in the ecosystem. IDB Lab has provided these opportunities. That has created more access for us to be able to grow. In terms of the context, my platform and BlackRock's is an investment fund. This is a BlackRock investment fund, and the idea is to have that name that really represents what we are, is this black diamond, the black people of Brazil. By developing this solution, we have been able to find ways to accelerate businesses, and particularly women-led businesses. That can help more people develop opportunities for their businesses to become part of a network. BlackRock's big potential comes from being able to connect people, those who created the ecosystem. Sometimes ecosystems can be too white or too ethnocentric. And this is where we can work with innovation and technology. Our results have been incredible over the last 2 years. We have worked with 24 different tech startups. They employ people, they secure investments, and the numbers sometimes are above 10 million reais. That has created job opportunities and also opportunities to transform the region. And these are the businesses that lead to other actions. And then there's also the challenge of creating an investment fund that is going to have an even bigger impact. We're talking about 20 different businesses that we are going to invest in. And we're creating opportunities for the people who simply can't access a major investment funds. We're thinking about a venture capital ecosystem, and then that's where we find this gap, where there are women-led businesses, these black people, sometimes who are marginalized, but don't necessarily have access to these major investment funds, or they can't get more investment. This is why we need to help them lift themselves up by their own bootstraps. We have our leaders as well. We want to see more black leaders, more of these women in these positions, and to make sure that they are part of all of the activities that are happening, never losing sight of the importance of investment. They are individuals who are very competent, and if we look at development, investment, and business development and opportunities, we create opportunities for people to leapfrog sometimes, and gives opportunities for black leaders to be able to contribute to developing and increasing that investment opportunity. Great, thank you very much. I am going to take a risk here and just pause. I know people are thinking about the data to action, from action to people. And then from that, let's talk now about things, the different areas where we are and the rules that apply. I know that what you're talking about is systemic change, especially in the different areas where you are operating. But this is a panel ultimately on partnerships, and you were talking about how partnerships help to give you a boost. So here's what I would like to do is see if we can play this game. Those of us who are entrepreneurs, sometimes there can be entrepreneurship in the public sector, and in the private sector you have a lot of entrepreneurs. And usually people who are in those spaces have a dream, or they think about a dream. And we try to not really read the fine print in those dreams. So I'm trying to bring that home here with this panel, and I have this question. If you're thinking about government, if the private sector can give you that thing you wish without the fine print, what would you ask for?
No le pedirían, pero acá es un deseo.
Or what wouldn't you ask? Well, if I was turning to the private sector, I would say that working in coordination with the public sector is very important. Of course, working from within the public sector, there's a lot you can do, but when you have the private sector alongside you, that can really be a strong instrument to narrow, if not eliminate, the gaps that we have in our region. We look at the technical players and the financial actors. If we all came together, we can really work on focusing on human rights and on advancing the rights of people. And in our case, we're talking about the people who have been left behind or who have been underserved by our governments and previous administrations in our case. Looking at the places where there has traditionally been less, and the businesses where people have had fewer opportunities, that would be important. But also looking at the mining vision that really led to stripping a lot of people of their rights in our region, this can now become an opportunity to help close those gaps, find opportunities, and especially for women. I think that as we think about the need for building peace, the kind of peace that should go beyond just our country, that's important. There are many countries in the region going through challenging times. There are not necessarily protections or assurances for a society to live freely and in peace. It's also important there to think about how the private sector can help mitigate the kinds of issues that led to conflict in our countries. And part of this has to do with what is happening with mining resources and pretty much ignoring the rights that the communities have. And so maybe that's a good place to start. To understand that humanity and the issue of people should go beyond any sort of financial goal we may have. I think that's key. Great. Well, great. That was a very broad and rich wish, but also very clear. something that should be part of a very specific target. Now, Inés, if you had to think about something you'd wish for, what would it be? Well, for investment to continue and to make sure there is affirmative action as we close the gender gap, including women in your businesses and leveraging public-private partnerships like in Panama with the Initiative on Gender Parity and taking that affirmative action like what you are doing with that work-life balance, with the support provided that should be part of a system that every country should have. But again, that kind of coordinated work that shouldn't only come from the public sector. That's a responsibility we all have. And so the partners are strategic partners that should support us. Thank you.
Excellent. Now we'll move on to asking something from the public sector. What would your wish be? Gerardo, I think you have something in mind. I agree very much with the minister. On the private side, I would say that we expect consistency and stability. I think that when we promote these programs and when we have a scattered approach, that leads to conflict. I can give you an example. There are benefits that result in incentives to get people incentives that keep people from working. For example, there's research that says that for every dollar invested in early stages of life, that the return on that is $6 or more, right? But women then decide that in order to provide that for the children, they decide to quit working, because in order to get that benefit, you have to quit your job because your income is too high. So policies need to be consistent with our aspirations. I agree that we need to work together. And the individual also plays an important role. I love what you were saying, Raquel, because in the end, it's clear there's a lot of different types of diversity, and we need to go from a different way of engagement. Obviously, the government needs to provide a consistent framework for that with legal certainty so that the private sector can create a bridge between individuals and that aspiration. That's how I would put it. Excellent. Raquel, would you add to that? I agree with what Clemencia was saying, but investing in education, to me, that is the main way to change society. There's no other way. If society doesn't start thinking about the collective as a whole, I don't see how we are going to change the future. We can't think about diversity and dealing with the society's problems if children from an early stage in life don't deal with these issues that affect us all. So investing in education, and this should be a right for all, not should be just on paper. Education is for all. And that is a way of excluding people today. So in terms of basic education, private education, that's what I would say. So you have this option. Having heard all of that, I think that the only thing I would add is that there's positive initiatives out there with positive results out there. When you make sure that leadership positions are filled by women, that you have black people in large companies, all of that leads to positive results. We've seen that already. So looking at the public sector, when we look at these positive initiatives as a basis for future activities, that's how action can really lead to better results. In Brazil, for example, we have university quotas where the technical knowledge of students that arrive to fill those quotas is greater, and that means greater possibilities for the private sector to get a qualified professional in their ranks. So the public sector working with these affirmative action initiatives is very important because it leads to positive results. As Clemente was saying, there is definitely a responsibility there. Public agencies need to demand affirmative action from the private sector because there's positive results from that. So that is a possibility. That's an initiative that we need to make sure that these actions truly contribute to society. Great, thank you, Maite. To round this off, since we have a little time left, you have done a lot on your own. Perhaps you were pioneers in your local area where you really played the role of a disruptor, working alone again. So, what would you say in terms of gratitude, where you've done all this? What would you say as words of gratitude? But gratitude in the sense of we need to continue working on this because this is how we are going to continue to build together. Clement, who would you thank? Well, I would say that I very much appreciate the work that we've done jointly with the Inter-American Development Bank in Colombia through our agency's work to combat violence against women. We have several pilots underway in several departments in our country, specifically in departments where we have little access because of connectivity or infrastructure. I would also express my appreciation for investment in the rural area, especially investing in rural women. The countryside is the part that feeds the rest of our society, and that's the rural sector needs not only economic empowerment, but it also needs environmental stewardship. It needs food security initiatives. We need to do everything possible also around the energy transition. We believe that our life, the lives of everyone, is at risk. And if we don't act responsibly, if we're not committed, if we don't act collectively, it's going to be very difficult to deal with these risks. So our policy as government, where we're really betting on women to make this change. We're a little bit more than half of the population in Colombia. So it's not just because of that, but also because the undeniable contributions that we have made in our countries in all of these areas. And that's why we need to make sure that these contributions from women are acknowledged, and acknowledged through our actions as a government to protect women's rights. And obviously, partnerships are very important in order to achieve these rights that we're working for. Ines? I would like to begin by thanking the Inter-American Development Bank for being strategic allies in the gender parity initiative, as well as in the work we're doing in Panama for investing in early childhood and everything we're doing in order to really change the paradigm. Investing at an early stage of life for us is the most important thing we can do as a country. I also want to thank the private sector, the NGOs that are part of the gender parity. Part of the gender parity initiative is based on actions, concrete plans, and action plans to close the gap to combat inequality, especially gender inequality. All that work means that we have served more than 15,000 women. We should continue to work together, work in partnerships, so because that is the only way to close the gender and poverty gaps, which is so important for me. It's also important for us to continue investing in women. It's not just a matter of human rights. It's also profitable. It's good business to include women, to include 50% of the population.
No sé si hablo en tus términos, Gerardo, pero ya se van contagiando y eso está
So this is
buenísimo.
contagious, Gerardo, and that's great. Who would you say thank you to? Well, first of all, I want to thank you for this forum. I think that this is a message that we can share with many people and in many places. First, I want to thank the Devi Foundation in Costa Rica. They've been the bridge between the government and the private sector to address this very pressing need. And it also, I also thank you to the organization that I represent, because it's a different approach that we've adopted here through this pilot. We wouldn't have been able to do it without them. So these are core pillars, and also obviously our leadership team, because they took this on as something that had to be done, and they have been ceaseless in their efforts and in their fight to create a system that protects more working mothers. Thank you for including civil society and the role they play, which is always so important, Raquel. Well, for me, it's whom would I think? The Atlas leadership team, the ESG team. I would not be here without them. It's been top-down decision-making, where it's let's do this and let's do that. The entire company full of so many people that have helped us so much, doing incredible work on out in the field. But I also want to thank all of our commercial partners, because in one way or another, we're able to build capacity. We're able to work together to make this program happen and to do all this together. So I want to thank our contracting partners very specifically, and obviously everyone here at this forum, all of my colleagues, for all of your contributions today. Thank you. Maite, it's your turn. You'll be concluding with this final words of gratitude. Right, it's a challenge to go last here, but first I would like to thank my organization for making it possible for me to be here, for all the entire struggle, for Anita Fiore, Irene, for Magdalena, and all of these women who were pioneers. They were the ones that really forced the issue to create this fund to involve other black women leaders in managing these funds. I also want to thank the IDB for the opportunity, obviously for this opportunity to be here with our colleagues and to be a part of IDB Lab's initiatives. And I would end here by asking that you leave here with a different point of view, focus on effective action so that you can make a transformative change, so that you can use what you've heard in this panel in order to create more opportunity, to make sure that we have more racial diversity, LGBTQ+, the disabled, indigenous women, black people in general. We need to have people be proactive, to do things right, to take action because of what you've seen here, and to commit your time and your effort, because that is how we make a change. So thank you for this opportunity. Well, I'll take the opportunity to say a few words of appreciation. Two, first, to the audience here for coming into this room on challenging issues that are not necessarily trending or fun. These are issues that can be painful, that we see when we look in the mirror. To the audience that's on the other side of the screen, and to you for a lifetime of effort to these hard issues, to find opportunities for the action you've taken. And thank you to the people that have brought this together, but this effort together that goes beyond the numbers. We're talking about the diversity, equity, inclusion, but when we set objectives for ourselves, there are strategic issues to deal with, urgent issues to deal with, which means we need to be active, we need to be present, and we need to be committed. My gratitude is for these people here, and a round of applause for being here, making this possible.